Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone. It's good that we're so happy you joined us this morning. This is the thriller mystery panel. The title of our panel is Timeless Tales and Turbulence, the art of writing compelling mysteries. I am your host and moderator, Catherine Tucker, and I'm so glad that you all took the time out of your schedules this morning to join us. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to our four panel members. Our first panel member is Alexia Gordon. Our second panel member is Mr. Reavis Wortham. Our third panel member is Steph Cha. And finally, our fourth panel member is Ms. Kathleen Kent.
Good morning.
So, what is turbulence? Well, the dictionary.com defines turbulence as the quality of or state of being turbulent. Like that says a lot. But also it says violence, disorder, or commotion. And guys, you know, we've seen a lot of violence and commotion over the last couple of years, particularly as it relates to the murder, unfortunately, of Black men, including Ahmaud Arbery, Michael Brown, and a young boy, Tamir Rice, a young woman, Breonna Taylor, and just a lot of commotion and violence. And then of course, the tipping point, the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing protests that happened. We're also seeing violence perpetrated on the Asian American community and these random shootings. I think we've had about 3 over the last week and a half, which is, you know, it's horrible, it's horrific, but that's real life, unfortunately. And so sometimes art imitates life, and sometimes life imitates art. So my question for our panel this morning is, how does turbulence show up in your art? How does it show up in your writing? And, or if it shows up in your writing, or if it doesn't. So our first guest this morning, I'd like to introduce you to is Miss Alexia Gordon, and I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about Alexia. Alexia is a physician by day and an award-winning hashtag Own Voices crime fiction novelist by night. She is the author of 5 books in the Gethsemane Brown mystery series. Her first, Murder in G Major, started as a class project at SMU, at SMU's Writer's Path. Her latest, Execution in E, was published in March 2020. Alexia is a member of Crime Writers of Color, Sisters in Crime, International Thriller Writers, and Mystery Writers of America. She also hosts the podcast, The Cozy Corner, with Alexia Gordon. Murder in G Major, her first, won a Lefty Award for Best Debut Novel and was a nominee for the Agatha Award for Best First Novel. It also was chosen one of Suspense Magazine's best debut novels in 2016, if I can say that word. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Alexia Gordon.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the panel, Catherine. I'm excited about this, especially since SMU is one of the sponsors, and SMU is where I got my start on the road to being a published author. So turbulence, I mean, as you've certainly already addressed some of the turbulence that's been going on in the world recently, add to that the pandemic, which shut so much down and put so many people out of work and frankly killed so many people and
absolutely
fear. So it's just been, turbulence would be kind of the word of the year, I guess, for 2020. On top of that, 2020 was also probably the most turbulent year for me personally, which, things that only affected me, which I admit I was reluctant to talk about because there were so many things affecting everybody at large. Who am I to complain about what's going on the personal level? But so I kind of had that tension between, can I even talk about how upsetting things are for me when so many people are suffering? But I had my father passed away, my uncle passed away, I had a car accident, had some turbulence with my publisher. I also was actually fortunate enough to win a scholarship to attend a year of graduate school to get a master's in defense studies at the U.S. Naval War College, which is actually why I'm over here in Newport, Rhode Island, instead of home in Chicago. So that was a good thing, but it was still turbulent because it meant I had to, move for a year from Chicago to Rhode Island. So my personal life has been in an uproar. The world has been in an uproar. And frankly, it still feels like it's 2020, honestly. So I'm just going to say this whole year has just kind of been chaotic for the planet. It's the new level of chaos in the real world. Honestly made it a little tough for me to write fiction about chaos because I write murder mysteries and that's chaotic. When someone dies violently, by definition, that's, violence, disorder, and commotion. Most of my writing right now school has actually kind of saved me because I've been writing nonfiction papers since July, which has helped me look at things differently because nonfiction academic writing is definitely different than writing mysteries, but it's also shown me that I can still sit down and put a few thousand words on paper and have it be good writing. So it kind of reassured me that I hadn't just totally lost it, which at some points I felt I had done. But when in my mystery writing, the turbulence that I like is sort of a more quiet turbulence, if you will. I mean, I write the Gethsemane Brown series is a paranormal cozy, so it's on the lighter side of the scale. It's not, there's not explicit gore and death and things on the page. A lot of the violence happens off screen, but it still happens. And what's always appealed to me is a lot of people read cozies because they're comforting. That's why they're called cozies. They're characters you become familiar with. That some cozy fans are just as devoted as romance fans. I mean, some of these folks treat the recurring characters in books as their personal friends, which sometimes it can even be scary how devoted they are. And I keep thinking of that book Misery, and I'm like, yeah, you're not gonna tie me up and break my legs, right? But underneath that coziness lies the fact that in this little isolated community that's safe on the surface, someone's going around killing at least one person, probably 2 or 3 or 5. And that's, I don't know. I'm also a true crime fan. And I don't know if you always hear somebody on those things, some horrible crime will happen and they'll be like, oh, I never thought that could happen here, not in this neighborhood. And so I've kind of devoted myself to saying, yeah, actually it could happen in this neighborhood. So sort of the turbulence and commotion that's sort of behind the calm facade of places that we think are safe, like the suburbs and the small towns. And I like stories where kind of ordinary people who are, sort of happy and are on an even keel, some unexpected turbulence comes out of left field and smacks them upside the head and they have to deal with it. Because I guess it's my inner cynic coming out. No place is really safe. And I feel the need to kind of remind people of that through my books in a subtle way. So, just the minute you're, relaxed and thinking, oh, everything's gonna be just fine, someone comes up and puts poison in your tea and things aren't fine anymore. So yeah, it's a little cynical and perverse, but it's my public service to remind everyone to stay on guard, because even in a gated community or a small town, bad things can happen. So that's how turbulence manifests in my fiction. It's the unexpected turbulence that catches people off guard, and they have to either find it within themselves to deal with it, or some people can't deal with it, and then what happens to those people who can't manage to overcome it or face it. As you mentioned, my most recent book is Execution in E. If you don't mind, I'll read a part of the first part of chapter 13, which is dealing with the turbulence that's happened after they have found a body hanging from a lighthouse in this quaint Irish village. And they're initially, it looks like the person had killed himself, but there's some doubt as to whether or not he had actually killed himself, because his fiance is certain that he was murdered. And so Gethsemane, my sleuth, is talking to the deceased man's friends, trying to find out if there was someone who might have wanted to murder him. Gethsemane, on the chance Father, and first I should also add, paranormal, there are ghosts and spirits and things, so that's why there's a reference to spirits in the first sentence of this, because the sleuth's main sidekick happens to be a ghost. Gethsemane, on the chance Father Tim had tracked down a spell to keep spirits on the other side of the veil, aimed her bike toward Our Lady. She halted in front of the Mad Rabbit when she spied Theophilus Derringer and Brian Nishi walking in. Were they distraught over Ty's death? Or were they, like Rosalie, shedding no tears? One way to find out. She parked her bike and followed them into the pub. May I join you? She asked as she neared their table. Theophilus rose from his seat and pulled over an extra chair. Please sit. Brian nodded, then turned his attention back to his drink. I'm sorry about Ty, she said. This must be a tough time for you both. No picnic for you either. Theophilus's mellifluous accent reminded her of a BBC adaptation of a Jane Austen novel. Considering the circumstances of how, Brian looked up from his drink. Did you see anyone or hear anything? The road to the lighthouse runs right past your cottage. No, Gethsemane said, nothing. No reason to tell him about Verna's late night trek up to Carrick Point, nor her run-in with Vivian. How long did you know Ty? Since university, Theophilus answered. The three of us, Brian, Ty, and me, were sweet mates. We knew him a damn sight longer than that header you got mixed up with, Brian said. Sonny, he means. Theophilus called to a barmaid. Same again? Then asked Gethsemane, did you want anything? Nothing for me, thanks. She came to snoop, not to drink. You didn't approve of Ty's relationship with Sonny? I approved of it the way I'd approve of going before a firing squad, Brian said. Theophilus toyed with his glass. I'm afraid Sonny was the only one looking forward to the upcoming nuptials, and she was mostly looking forward to the photo ops. I guess Mal may have been looking forward to them. Sonny was paying him a bloody fortune. He'd have earned it, Brian said. Probably would have developed repetitive motion injury of his trigger finger. No amount of money is worth being saddled with that horrendous cow, not even for as long as it'd take for the ink on an annulment documents to dry. Ty should have stuck with Verna. Probably be alive now if he had. Gethsemane leaned closer. Verna? You know Verna? Because Verna had claimed she didn't know either of them. Sure we know her, Brian said. Sweet girl. Theo's sister introduced her to Ty. My sister apologized to Verna for that. Theophilus drank a good portion of his drink before continuing. Ty was my mate and all, and I hate to speak ill of the dead, but Ty didn't treat Verna as well as she deserved. She was good for Ty, but Ty wasn't so good for her. Brian slammed a fist on the table. Glasses rattled. A few heads turned. None of this matters now, Theo, does it? Ty's dead and what's past is past. Theophilus didn't answer right away. No, none of that matters now. He emptied his glass. Where's that barmaid got to? Don't you think you ought to slow down, mate? Brian arranged Theophilus's empty glasses, 1, 2, 3, in a row on the table. Are you my nanny now, Bri? Theophilus ordered a fourth. Gethsemane waited until both men finished their drinks and the silence grew uncomfortable. Do you think Ty killed himself? Sonny doesn't. Brian swore. Let me guess. She can imagine that anyone would rather be dead than with her. What's her explanation? Autoerotic asphyxiation gone horribly wrong? Theophilus shot Brian a look. I don't see how it could be anything but suicide given where he was found. Was Ty suicidal? Gethsemane thought back to the red flags her mother, a psychiatrist, had spoken about. Did he put his affairs in order, make a will, seem emotionally distant, distracted? No more so than any other bloke about to take the plunge. Brian cringed. Sorry, get married. He lived in what I guess you'd call a bachelor pad, Theophilus said. He had to sell his apartment and furniture. Brian interrupted. Sonny made it clear none of his furniture would be welcome in the family home. Give notice at work. He and Sonny plan to live in the States, you see, Theophilus continued. Don't know if he made a will. Signed a prenup, Brian said. Sonny's idea. What about visiting old friends or ex-fiancés? Had he tracked down Verna to say a final goodbye? Making amends with family? Ruminating on past events, losses? A glance that Gethsemane couldn't decipher passed between Theophilus and Brian before Theophilus answered. Ty wasn't one for dwelling on the past. No profit in it, he said. Ty focused on future plans, not past accomplishments, Brian said. Always had an eye out for his next big opportunity. As far as he was concerned, anything that happened more than 6 months ago was ancient history and best forgotten. Doesn't sound as if he was at high risk for suicide. But who would have killed him, Theophilus asked. Who could have? Verna's not got killer instinct, plus she's half Ty's size. No way she could have gotten him over a railing. Sonny wouldn't have done it, Brian said. I don't doubt she's capable of murder. If Ty had turned up dead after the wedding, she'd be number one on the suspect list. She'd probably even post the kill shots on her social media feed. But she'd never have ruined her wedding plans and lost out on all those influencer endorsement deals. Not even if she discovered Ty loved her money more than he loved her, Gethsemane asked. Brian shook his head. She knew Ty was marrying her money. She didn't care as long as he played his part in front of whatever smartphone camera happened to be pointed in their direction. She turns that little girl voice on and off like a tap and makes cow eyes at any male over the age of 12 she thinks may be of use to her. But the helpless female routine is just that, a routine. She's as cold-blooded and pragmatic as they come and suffers no illusion about what she was getting into with Ty. Besides, Theophilus said, Sonny's also too small to have hoisted Ty over a railing. You're both convinced Ty took his own life? Theophilus shrugged. What other explanation is there? Doubt we'll ever know why, Brian said. In the end, does it matter? Dissecting Ty's past, searching for an answer won't bring Ty back, will it? I say leave it alone. She couldn't leave it alone. Not after Sonny barged into her house and insisted a murder had occurred. And not after she caught her friend's girlfriend in a lie about not knowing the dead guy's best friends. She flagged down a barmaid. On second thought, I'll have that drink.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexia. Where can fans find you and find your Gethsemane Brown series?
I do have a website, alexiagordon.net. I'm also on Facebook as alexiagordon.writer and on Instagram as Alexia Gordon Author, which is my more book-focused Instagram, and at Dr. Lex 1995 if you want to see pictures of cats and food and whatever place I happen to be traveling to at the time.
Awesome. I would encourage all of you to go and get this series of books. You will enjoy Gethsemane Brown so much. She's fun, she's smart, she's tenacious, and she's witty. So if you want a really fun read, you grab this series. It's awesome. Thank you so much, Alexia, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me here. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. All righty. So our next author, I want to bring up a gentleman. His name is Reavis Wortham. Tell you a little bit about Reavis. He started his writing career in the 5th grade, and his work didn't truly progress until nearly 25 years later. In the meantime, he graduated from W.W. Samuel High School. He spent 2 years at Eastfield Junior College in Mesquite, Texas, and 2 years later earned a BS degree in industry management from East Texas State University, now Texas A&M Commerce. Instead of going into the architectural field like he planned, he realized he had no interest in leaning over a drafting board for the rest of his life. So he wound up taking another year's worth of courses and earned a teaching degree. Reavis's first award-winning novel in the Red River series, The Rockhold, was originally released in 2011. There are 7 novels in this series, with number 8, Laying Bones, released in January 2021. He recently joined the Kensington Publishing family with his new Sunny Hawk thriller series. So welcome, Reavis.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I sure appreciate it. And thank you all for attending and coming out this morning to hear us talk about what we do or try to explain what we do. That's always the most difficult part, is to folks think that writers just sit down at a computer and put their fingers on the key and words flow. And it's different for everyone. Some are outliners who need extensive outlines to write. Others are like me. I don't even know what I'm going to do until I do put my fingers on the keyboard, and then the story flows as the characters take over and go through the motions that they want to go through, not through the motions that I want to send them to. But I do have two series. The Texas Red River series is set in rural Northeast Texas back in the 1960s. The first one, The Rock Hole, was set in 1964, and I really wanted to do this series to honor my granddad, who was a farmer and constable back in the 1960s. Well, actually, from the 40s until the early 80s, he served as a constable of a rural community in Shakota, Texas, and he would ride tractors and work cows and do the farming things that he needed to do, raise crops. But when he came in the evenings, or someone came to get him in the field, he would put a badge on that he kept in his pocket or kept at the house, and drop a little pistol in his pocket, and then he would go and become serve as constable for Precinct 3 in Lamar County. And if you don't know what a constable is, these individuals are an arm of the sheriff's department. They deal with the areas outside of the town and the rural communities. They did back then. It's changed over the years, but they were the familiar close arm of the law for many communities. So my granddad did that for many years, and when I sat down to first write about him and about the community of Shakota, which I named Center Springs in the series, I realized that everything evolves around the outside world, or the bad things that people bring to good people. As we're, the word turbulence has been used today, and turbulence is the disruption of normal life. And what happens in this little community of Shakota or Center Springs, Texas, is the people are raising. It's rural. They farm. They some of them work two jobs. They work in town in nearby Chisholm, and then they have their cattle and their crops and their pigs and chickens or whatever it is that they raise. But all they want to do is to raise kids and have a nice, safe, comfortable life, and go to church on Sundays. That's their dream. That's all they want. But outside influences always come in and disrupt their lives. And that's what happens in all of my books. Small communities are influenced very, very heavily by things going on in the outside world. And for example, in my first novel, The Rock Hole, there's a serial killer in their midst that grew up there, but no one knew this individual was a serial killer, and they had to learn to deal with it. And this is based on a true story that I heard growing up when I was a kid. I would spend much of my time down there with my grandparents, and we had a great life. And it was almost like To Kill a Mockingbird life. It was a great little town. People knew each other. People loved each other. But there was something going on there that they did not understand. And so my granddad would go up to this country store. I don't know how many of you are from the country, but back in the old days, as my kids called the olden days, there was a little rural community store that offered everything that the community wanted. They, everything from bread, vegetables, to hay and seed and feed for their animals, and hardware and harness and everything else that people used. And So I would go up to the store with him, and that's where all the older folks, I call them the older folks, they were my age at the time, but I would go up and with my granddad, because I was kind of his little sidekick, and we would go up to the store and he would buy me an RC Cola and peanuts, or to shake down into, you ever shake peanuts down into a Coke? Oh, they're great that way. But you don't use a little Spanish peanuts, because then it's just a mess. So you have to have the big shell peanuts. But I would get that, or a Moon Pie, or Baby Ruth bar, whatever he had. They were a nickel or a dime, and he had a little change in his pocket. And then I would go outside on the porch and sit and listen to the old men there, the Spit and Whittle Club, as my grandmother used to call them. And I would listen. And I was learning things. I listened, but I didn't understand what I was learning. I was hearing about the evolution of a serial killer, because they were finding animals that were mutilated, and with little pieces of paper next to them to tell what the next mutilation was going to be. And today we know that's a budding serial killer polishing his craft, but they didn't know that back then. Even the FBI was only like 30 or 40 years old. They hadn't developed all the techniques to chase down these individuals that they have today. And my granddad had no earthly idea about a serial killer. He didn't know what that was either. All he ever dealt with were drunks and family disputes. And I remember in his later years, in the 70s and early 80s, when he found something hidden under a bridge he called marijuana. And he'd never seen marijuana before, and it was in a bale. But it was a new world for him even at that time. But he worked on that case for several months, and then the killing stopped, the mutilation stopped, and we never heard anything else about it. That was the crux, the basis for the Rock Hole. And it goes on throughout the series. The books advance one book after another. And I use a lot of techniques to amp it up, to add more chaos to the story. We see it from several different viewpoints. Two young children or see the world in first person. Ned Parker, the constable, my granddad, or Top's granddad, he saw it through the eyes of folks who lived through the Depression, through age and wisdom. And then we see it through folks that are about 30. So you see it from different viewpoints all the way through. And every book advances a year. So you watch everyone grow, you can see what's going on. But I even use little techniques, for example, the weather. I mean, the weather creates all kinds of problems, but we don't realize. I mean, we were just talking before this came on. We just recently realized a huge ice and snowstorm here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It dropped temperature down to -4. Anything that's going on is disrupted. And so the weather is a character in all of my books. The weather disrupts things. The weather adds a new element to all the stories as they advance. The most recent book, Laying Bones, has all of those elements. It has a massive snowstorm in Northeast Texas in 1969. It has a piece of land between Oklahoma and Texas that neither state will claim, because the Red River is our northern border here, and the Red River moves. As the years pass, as storms come in, the river might move a half a mile to a mile north. And then 10, 15 years later, it may undulate like a snake and go south. Well, sometimes it leaves orphan pieces of land on either side. And Laying Bones is set in 1969 during just such a time when the piece of Oklahoma is on the Texas side. The Oklahoma lawmakers and the lawmen cannot get down to this piece of land, but you can access it through several pastures in Texas. And so criminals from Arkansas come down and decide they are going to build a honky tonk, as we called it back in the old days, a place where you can drink, gamble, and buy drugs in 1969. And now Ned has to deal with that, which Texas doesn't want him to deal with. Oklahoma refuses to deal with it. But now we have Ned Parker and the deputy sheriff, John Washington, who team up throughout all of my books, and they work together to find out what's going on in this little honky tonk, because an individual is killed and left in a creek to make it look like an accident. But Ned Parker knows good and well this man that's dead didn't accidentally drown because there's no water in his lungs. And to top it all off, he's Ned's nephew. And so with all that chaos going on, then we have a snowstorm that brings everything to a halt. And that's the crux of Laying Bones. And it is, as you said, the eighth book in the Red River series. My Sunny Hawk series have won 2 awards. I am honored to have won 2 Spur Awards from the Western Writers Association. Even though the books are contemporary Westerns, they are considered Westerns. And that series, there are 4 books in that series, and Hawk's Target and Hawk's War took consecutive Spur Awards for 2 years. And so I'm really honored to tell you about that. With that, Catherine, I'll turn it back to you, and I'll answer any questions anyone has about the series or the craft of writing this type of stories.
Thank you so much, Reavis. I wish we had more time to actually delve. I knew it would go fast, but I didn't know it would go this fast. So yes, that was wonderful. If you've never read any of Reavis's books, I highly recommend that you grab some copies of them. I remember reading The Rockhole probably back in 2016 or so, and just a wonderful writer. You talk about sitting down at your keyboard and the words don't always flow. It seems like your words just flowed effortlessly in building characters, building scenes, creating the city, the town, the characters. So just wonderful, wonderful writing. And I can't wait to start reading your Sunny Hawk series and see what you've done with that character. So thank you so much for being here, Reavis. How can people find you?
Oh, you can find me at my website, reaviswortham.com. And you can email me through there. Find all my books are available in all formats, all platforms, from all book dealers, online and physical book dealers. You held up The Rockhole. It's been re-released now. Is that backwards? I think it's flipped. But
no, that's good. Mm-hmm.
Is it good? Okay, this looks backwards to me. It's been re-released. I had the honor of seeing it come back out again, and it's really making waves now. You can also find me on Facebook. Reavis Wortham is not really my author's page, but that's where all the action happens right now. We have almost 5,000 followers on that page. I can't take any more, so I'm going to have to shift it over to my author page, which is Reavis Z Wortham. So please like that one and follow me on Reavis Wortham. And I would love to hear from any of you about anything. And so I sure appreciate it, Catherine. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. All right, so moving on. We are so honored to have a writer from the West Coast. She got up really early this morning to be a part of this panel, and I'm so grateful. Steph Cha. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Steph. Steph is the author of Your House Will Pay, which is the winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the California Book Award, and the Juniper Song Crime Trilogy. She's a critic whose work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, where she served as noir editor, and is the current series editor of the Best American Mystery and Suspense Anthology, which is a big deal. A native of San Fernando Valley, she lives in Los Angeles with her family. Steph she's been chosen as the Rising Star Guest of Honor at VoucherCon 2021. That will be in New Orleans this year, which is also a big deal. I'd like to welcome Steph Cha.
I'm so excited for New Orleans. I hope that happens.
I know, me too. I'm so ready to see people and just, be outside of this bubble, this Zoom bubble.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a panel that really speaks to what I do. The confluence of turbulence and crime fiction. I write crime fiction because I think it is an excellent way to examine basically societal turbulence. I guess I hadn't actually thought of it in those exact terms, but that's what I do. I I think that the fact of crime, the fact of murder, and just people deciding to hurt other people, I mean, that's kind of the fundamental, that's the starting point of crime fiction. And I think that whenever you see people making these decisions to harm one another, there is going to be some level of societal factors that are underlie those crimes. And that's kind of what I'm interested in exploring, you know. And I think this is recognizable to anybody who consumes the news, right? Like the stories that end up on our TV screens, in our Twitter feeds, tend to be stories about violence and about crime, because those are the news grabbing, the dramatic stories that really get our attention, and that also just make us care because people are being hurt. You know, and you know, you asked me to be on this panel a while ago, and then obviously the last couple of weeks have been very turbulent weeks in the US, you know, and I have obviously, I've been paying attention to kind of this wave of anti-Asian violence certainly over the last few months and over the last year, you know, ever since the beginning of this pandemic, you know, when the president of the United States was using racist terms to very consciously put a face on coronavirus, and a face that was Asian. And so that's something that I've been watching. And, you know, I've also been at home with a baby for the last year, you know. I gave birth like 3 weeks into the pandemic. And so I've been, you know, I've kind of had my hands tied when it comes to writing. You know, I've been able to edit this anthology, and I've been able to read mostly audio actually, but I haven't been able to like start a new book. And I keep thinking, you know, what am I going to write about next? And I think a topic that comes up a lot among crime writers, but all writers, is like whether we're going to incorporate coronavirus into our future work, right? And that's something I've been thinking about. And I think where I land is that, you know, I don't think any of us are going to be able to write a book that isn't somewhat touched by the events of the past year, even if we don't deal directly with the virus. I think we are now being left with a society that has been touched by this traumatic year on every level. You know, I think the effect it has had on accelerating the wealth gap in this country, on housing, on just the composition of families. I mean, so many people have lost loved ones this past year, you know, including Alexia. I was sorry to hear that, you know. I think like it's just a year that has reformed the country in ways that we aren't really going to understand for many years to come. You know, it's just one of these huge events. And those are these are the kinds of things that I incorporate into crime fiction, because I think crime fiction is such an interesting way to probe these tensions and to probe these changes, you know. I mean, and I think that's part of the curse of being a crime writer, is that like even as I watch news stories, you know, even as I was thinking about the horrible spa shootings outside of in Metro Atlanta, you know, I think about these things. I think about kind of the broad effects that these things will have on dynamics, on people's writing, on what people care about, you know. And you know, I had been paying attention to kind of particularly, you know, in the wake of some of these shootings, the tension I noticed between Black and Asian American people was running really high before the Atlanta shooting. And I think now we are seeing a lot more solidarity, which has been really heartening to me. But I think like all these kinds of those like uncomfortable spaces is kind of where I like to write, you know. And I think because I'm an American crime writer, I also inevitably write about race, you know, and race relations. I think also part of it is that I'm Asian American, and so you know, the option of writing like, you know, monochrome casts is not available to me, because like I'm not somebody who is able to run in circles that are entirely monochrome. You know, I have like a very natural, like diverse environment. And Yeah, and I think like where there are these overlaps and collision points between different communities is where you see a lot of very interesting tension. Um, my last book, Your House Will Pay, is based loosely on the 1991 murder of Latasha Harlins, who was a 15-year-old Black girl in South Central Los Angeles who walked into a convenience store, got into a tussle with the Korean store owner over a bottle of orange juice that the owner accused the girl of stealing. You know, she wasn't trying to steal it. And the owner ended up shooting this girl in the back of the head. She was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, but served no jail time. She was sentenced to no jail time. And it was this huge miscarriage of justice that became also a flashpoint for existing tensions between Korean store owners and Black community members since the 80s, when, you know, Koreans started coming to Los Angeles in very large numbers and opening up businesses in this area where like white people had completely fled. And so Korean money went really far, you know? And so it was this like horrible story that when I first heard it, you know, I had just such a strong visceral reaction to it. You know, one of intense anger on behalf of Latasha Harlins, but also one of shame and guilt because this woman who I had never met or hadn't even heard of, and was also from my community. You know, she's somebody who I thought I could very easily have gone to the same grocery stores as, you know, I read rumors that she had resettled in the San Fernando Valley, which is where I grew up, you know, and I read about kind of the ways that the Korean community shielded her and kind of stepped up for her. And I think I just felt very connected to this story in very negative ways. And I wanted to explore that. I kind of wanted to explore those emotions, and I wanted to explore the place that this murder had in Los Angeles history. And to do that, I kind of knew almost immediately that I needed to write a novel about it, because I think what crime fiction is able to do is it's able to dive in on a very personal level into these stories and kind of really plumb the nuances and explore things on the ground level. You know, so the book I wrote is it's a present day novel about the family members of a fictionalized version of this murder, and it looks at the ways that that all the issues that were bubbling in the early 90s, you know, are very much alive today. And it's a book that I started in 2014 and that published in late 2019. And it was interesting because like after George Floyd's murder, you know, I'd been at home for 3 months, like most of us, you know, with like a newborn, as disconnected to my city as I had ever been without leaving it, you know. And I was seeing all this stuff happening right outside my door, but that I was watching on TV, you know. And I had a lot of people reach out to me and tell me that like my book felt very timely to them. And like, I think that's an interesting thing to hear, because like I'm always glad that like my work is able to like connect with people and help them understand things that are going outside, that are going on outside their homes. On the other hand, like I think that the idea of timeliness, you know, is just a matter of like what the media pays attention to. You know, I think all the George Floyd murder and Breonna Taylor's murder, you know, like those two in particular, like I mean, they really they reminded me of Latasha Harlins and Rodney King. Rodney King, who by the way, like was somebody who was beaten by cops horribly and became a huge figure in this movement against police brutality, but who today you never would have heard of because he survived. And and the issue of police brutality against Black people and violence against Black bodies is something that has never ever been out of American history. There has never been a moment of rest, you know, since Black people were brought forcibly to this country. There has never been a moment of rest. And so it's been interesting because between 2014 and 2019, I saw the kind of the repetition of this violence, and And, George Floyd's murder blowing up, like it's like a horrific crime. It's like a horrific tragedy. But I honestly think that part of the reason he blew up, his story blew up, was just that the timing was right. We were all sitting at home paying attention to the news. I think it could have happened with a lot of other people. And
Absolutely.
that level of, oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry, Steph, that I have to interrupt and cut you off because what you were saying is so profound and it is so real. But unfortunately, our time is so short this morning, and I have to actually get to our last guest before we end our session. I want to encourage everybody to please go out and get Steph's book, Your House Will Pay. It is awesome. It's a book that I felt like when I finished reading it, there's a story that she had to tell. She handles a very uncomfortable situation of race with deftness and thoughtfulness, and she allows the Korean community and the Black community to look at, to examine this issue from both sides of the coin. So please go out and get her book. Steph, would you put that information where they can reach you in the chat? Also, Reavis, and if you guys have. And I want to introduce our last guest to you. Her name is Kathleen Kent, and I'm going to read Kathleen's bio. One second. Okay, let me unmute Sandaria. She asked me to unmute her. Just one second. Okay. So Kathleen Kent is a New York Times bestselling author and a 2-time Edgar Award nominee for her contemporary crime novels, The Dime and The Burn. The Washington Post writes of the series. Raymond Chandler praised Dashiell Hammett for taking crime fiction out of the drawing room and into the streets. With Betty Rizek, Kathleen Kent brings those mean streets to life in an excitingly as anybody has in years. The third Detective Betty book, titled The Pledge, will be released November 2021. Ms. Kent is also the author of 3 award-winning historical novels, The Heritage's Daughter, The Traitor's Wife, and The Outcast. She's written short stories and essays for D Magazine, Texas Monthly, and Lit Hub, and has been published in crime anthology Dallas, the crime anthology Dallas Noir. In March 2020, she was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters for her contribution to Texas literature. Please welcome Kathleen Kent.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. One of the things I enjoy most about being in panels is to be able to meet other authors, whether they write historical fiction, Western, crime, and there's so many intersections there, but I'm thrilled to have been invited. I want to give a special shout out to Sandaria Faye, who's worked so long and diligently to create Dallas as a new literary salon. So I really want to give her credit and acknowledge her hard work to pull this all together. And, this is a really interesting topic, turbulence. I think that a lot of the authors, all 3 of the authors, have talked about that some of their best work, most creative work, has come out of living, existing in uncomfortable spaces. And it's a wonderful way to exorcise those demons and expose, as Steph said, to expose the greater demons, societal demons, through fiction. Isabel Allende said, "What's truer than truth? The story." And very often fiction can illuminate these inequities in a way that, that maybe nonfiction does oftentimes. My approach to writing fiction came rather late in life. I lived and worked in New York for 20 years, first as in the commodity exchange, and then for 10 years as a contractor to the Department of Defense. And I was used to turbulence, a lot of headwind, in my professional life because I was often the only woman in the room. And so as with exercise, with progressive resistance, I felt that one becomes stronger physically by lifting heavier weights, and one becomes stronger in terms of character, personality, persistence. If you I was going to write full time, I used that idea of headwind to in the development of my fictional characters, and not, I guess, not as a coincidence, in my 3 works of historical fiction and soon to be 3 works in crime fiction in a series, is that the female characters are oftentimes the only woman in the room, or are pitted against male-dominated societal issues. There's a saying that good women don't make history. And so a lot of times it's the women who push up against societal norms, test the boundaries, exceed those boundaries, that end up making the biggest noise. So I've used that in my fictional works and historical fiction works, and also in the crime fiction. So the crime fiction in particular, I have family members who've been in law enforcement. I know Reavis talked about his grandfather being a constable. And I think writing about law enforcement now is a challenge, because the idea of the old guard and the way things were done and police brutality is very much in the headlines, as it should be. And I've had some really interesting and uncomfortable conversations with law enforcement doing research for this. The main character in The Dime and the Burn is a female detective from New York. She joins the Dallas Police Department, which has one of the fewest number of female police officers in the country. And it has been until recently, until we had, the chief prior, Renee Hall, tried to make a commitment to diversifying the police department. So it's changing, but it's very slow to change. So anyway,
Kathleen,
yes,
I am
sorry.
so sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm so sorry. We have absolutely completely run out of time.
That's okay. I understand.
It went by absolutely too fast. I wish we had more time. I just wish we do. The next group is waiting to come on. If you haven't read any of Kathleen Kent's books, guys, you need to pick them up. Her new series, The Dime with Betty Rizek, is an awesome new series. Kathleen, put your information, please, in the chat where they can reach your books. And thank you, Kathleen, so much for coming. Reavis, thank you. Alexia, thank you. Steph, thank you so much for being a part of this panel this morning. I so enjoyed it. I could have stayed here for another 3 hours talking to you guys, and I know everyone else could have as well. So thank you, and I apologize that I had to cut it short. All righty, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll see you hopefully in October at BoucherCon.
Yes, hopefully.
All righty, bye-bye.
Bye to all.
Thanks all.